All right. Nice to see a lot of people online from all around the world. Greetings from Jyväskylä, Finland, and welcome to our webinar, Build a Stress and Resilience Mindset with guest speaker Simon Jeffries. We have a really interesting 45-minute session ahead and very topical. The pandemic and the series of lockdowns continue to test our patience and resilience all over the world, and I think it's more important than ever to learn to adjust and adapt and deal with stress in a sensible way. My name is Tiina Hoffman. I'm an exercise physiologist and master trainer at Firstbeat, and my guest Simon is joining me from the UK today. Here is a peek at what it looked like here in Jyväskylä this morning. A lot of snow and sunshine, and I worked on my own resilience by starting work early and then took a short break mid-morning to go skiing in the sunshine. I think it's a good reminder that we should seize these kind of opportunities when possible. And then our agenda, I will introduce Simon and he will give the main presentation on stress, including his experiences and strategies for building better resilience. After Simon's part, we'll continue discussing the topic and I'll also share a few examples from Firstbeat data, including the concepts of supercompensation and load of life. And in the end, we'll have some time for questions from you as well. Let me move back into here. I'm going to stop sharing my slides and I'll introduce Simon Jeffries now. He works as a mindset and resilience coach with The Natural Edge, a company that he co-founded several years ago, specializing in creating sustainable and effective programs for people to help them perform at their optimal potential. Before his corporate wellness career, he was a Royal Marine Commando and then served in the Special Forces with several tours in Afghanistan. I really look forward to hearing Simon's take on this topic, including how he utilizes his Special Forces background and strategies in the battles of real life. So great to have you as our guest today, Simon, and I'll turn the mic over to you now.
Perfect. Thanks, Tiina. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for everyone here who's taken the time out. Tina's pretty much covered my intro now and I sort of go into my background and journey anyway in the presentation. So I'm probably just going to jump straight into it. If you think of any questions throughout, feel free to drop them into the chat because I know we've got people monitoring it if there's anything that you want to ask. So if you give me a second, I'm going to switch my camera off and get the slides up and we will get started. Right, okay. So how do you go about eliminating stress and building resilience? To give you my experience in finding the answer, I'm going to take you back a few years to 2014. And at that time, I was serving in UK Special Forces. And although it was very demanding, I loved the job and was very happy, but I was getting to the point where I felt as if I'd accomplished all of the things that I wanted. And so in the following year, in July 2015, I took the plunge and left the military. And by September, I was working in London for a management consultancy. Basically, I didn't have an exact plan of what I wanted to do, and this seemed like a good opportunity. But that is when things started to go a bit wrong. And why a few months later, I was sitting on my own in the office, looking and feeling knackered. It was 7 a.m. I'd come in again early to try and get ahead of the curve. But for the previous hour, I'd just been sat there wondering how the hell I'd ended up feeling so low. I felt like a shadow of my former self. I had a head full of racing thoughts of everything that needed to get done, but no enthusiasm or energy to do any of it. And I couldn't figure out how I'd even got to this place where I wasn't in control anymore, let alone how to get out of it. And it's a bit like being trapped. You know you have to do something, but you're stuck. And it's incredibly frustrating because you can't seem to break free. And it was only with retrospect that I understood it was stress, but I didn't realize that at the time because it creeps into your life and spreads out to affect everything you do. And I'm sure everyone on this call has had unpleasant feelings caused by stress when you have fear of things to come, worrying about bills or problems with your relationship, while at other times everything feels hectic and busy, but nothing seems to get accomplished. And here's the thing, it can feel like we are the only ones not coping, that perhaps we just need to work harder or longer and that will solve the problem. But it's just not true. Stress and stress-related disorders are becoming the most common mental health issues we face in modern times. And the solution is not to grind out more hours. And in fact, it's worth briefly mentioning what stress actually is. Stress is a response that basically advises you on what to do. It's a reaction where your brain decides whether there is a threat, and if there is, it triggers a fight or flight reaction to make sure that we are best able to respond to the threat. And in small doses, this is a brilliant evolutionary system that works very well. This response kept our ancestors safe from dangerous animals or unrelenting conditions. And it is what is known as acute stress, meaning that it is short and sharp. And in itself, it doesn't take a heavy toll if we find ways to relax quickly. Once the stressor has been dealt with, we need to return our body to normal to be healthy and happy. And this still serves us today if we feel like danger is close by and we switch into survival mode. The problem is that in comparison to evolution, modern society has come about very quickly, and the system that has served us so well is now malfunctioning. Today, we have a frustrating daily commute, financial strain, relationship disagreements, or caring for a sick loved one. And these are all situations that can trigger the stress response and then keep it going for weeks, months, or even years at a time. And that's where things start to go really wrong. In today's busy world, we are prone to perceiving a low level of threat in everyday situations over a prolonged period of time, leading to a long-term stress response that is extremely hard on the body. A good way to think about it is like this. Imagine, if you will, that your body is like a small medieval town. In normal times, the population tends the fields, maintain buildings, and look after the animals. If the barbarians approach, a scout rings the bell and half the population stop what they're doing and defend the town. The barbarians are fought off and the villagers return to their tasks to keep the town running. That is acute stress, short, sharp periods of alertness and necessary action only when required. But if the scout believes the barbarians are always about to burst out of the nearby woods and constantly rings the warning bell, it means that half the population are always on the walls, ready for an attack that never comes. Meanwhile, the grain is rotting in the fields, the buildings are leaking, and the town is generally falling apart. This is chronic stress, continuous and unnecessary pressure that causes severe damage. And this damage reveals itself in many ways, like weakening our immune system. It's no coincidence that you often come down something at the worst times, like when you have a particularly busy period at work or a pressing deadline. And that's because chronic stress does a real number on our immune systems, making you more likely to get sick. Digestive health is also closely linked to your stress levels, giving unpleasant side effects like indigestion, IBS, or loss of appetite. And when your body is constantly in fight or flight mode, it produces excess cortisol, which can leave you battling a host of aches and pains, including back and neck pain. If you've ever been for a massage, I can almost guarantee that the masseuse has made a comment about feeling the stress built up in your body somewhere. And this can also lead to tension headaches and migraines. For women, sudden changes in your cycle can indicate that you're enduring too much stress. And strange dreams can be a warning sign as your brain subconsciously works through the stress you either don't know is there or are simply trying to ignore. Making decisions also becomes a challenge. It can be easy to think of not being able to make small decisions as just one of those things, but it really isn't. Stress has a very negative impact on how clearly we think and act. And the thing with all this stuff, we don't even realize that they're linked to stress. We just assume that they are all independent problems. But your body does not work like that. Every single part of your body affects to a greater or lesser degree pretty much every other part. When we get sick or things aren't right, the symptoms might be problems sleeping, a gut disorder, issues with our skin, or some other complaint. But they are not the cause. They are just signals that the body is out of balance and that something or many things are going wrong elsewhere. But once you start joining the dots, you begin to see how the problems we struggle with are directly linked to stress and how we deal with that stress. I personally experienced this stark difference between the two sides of the stress coin. During my military service, I felt completely on top of my game and in control. My tours in Afghan, for example, were punctuated with short bouts of acute stress that were essential to survival. But periods in between this, it was actually very stress-free, because operational tours can be a bit like being in a bubble. You have no bills to worry about, no busy commute, no day-to-day problems that can feel like a grind. And you have a brilliant social environment because you're surrounded by good mates the entire time. So I basically had zero chronic stress, and it allowed me to function at a very high level. But when I started my job in the city, that all changed. Getting onto a ram tube into work each morning and trying to figure out costings and spreadsheets wasn't life-threatening, but those small, constant daily stresses were adding up to have a big impact without me even realizing it. Because the problem in our always-on culture, being in a perpetual state of stress, can start to feel normal. As our schedules get busier and busier, we adjust to a more hectic lifestyle without even realizing that we seriously need to take action. And it's a bit like the fishbowl effect. Just as the fish has no idea that it's in a tank, the way that we feel on a daily basis becomes our own new normal. So we don't even realize how much better we could be feeling. And that also means we don't fully appreciate just how damaging this constant day in, day out stress can be. But I really started to notice it. When you're suffering from stress, it doesn't take much to lose your cool, losing your temper when someone cuts you up, snapping at your partner or your kids for nothing in particular because you're feeling rushed or busy, or even getting upset or taking offense at the smallest of things. For me, I started getting irritated by simple stuff, and one of them was the way that the guy at work on the desk next to me ate his food each day. And it's really easy to convince yourself that this is just how life is, how everybody is. But unfortunately, the people who get the brunt of these negative emotions are always those closest to you. And I started getting really short with my girlfriend, picking fights for no reason, and looking at my phone instead of connecting with her. I also found that I wasn't taking part in as many social activities as I used to, because I always felt there was too much to do, and I just kind of lost interest in making the effort to meet up with people. Something else that happened was my focus was nowhere near as clear as it usually was. And I'd forget little things like keys more easily, and small tasks like doing the laundry or food shopping seemed to take much more effort. My cravings for eating junk also went up, which for me meant devouring packets of Oreos. And the scary thing is that when we are stressed, we can consume up to 40% more food than normal. And those hunger hormones also influence the type we crave, basically those with high fat and sugar content. So all of the processed junk food that is really easy to gorge on. Something else I didn't talk about is the effect it had on my sex life with my girlfriend, or really lack of, because my sex drive almost disappeared. And this is because chronic stress causes the body to produce stress hormones such as cortisol at the expense of sex hormones like testosterone. And my desire to train plummeted. It is the most inconsistent I have ever been with my training. And this was a huge eye-opener for me because I've loved sport and exercise since I was a kid, and it is a core part of my identity. So for myself, someone who has a natural love of training, to go down a path of eating a crap diet and losing interest in exercise, that really showed me just how powerful the negative effect of stress is and how much it throws your body and mental state out of balance. And it made me realize that no wonder there are so many people struggling with diet and exercise. If you don't have a natural love of that stuff and you've got chronic stress bubbling away under the surface, which most people do, then it's no wonder that losing weight or getting fit feels like this massive battle, because you're fighting an incredibly powerful force. And the cold hard reality is that many of us accept that a lot of these things, to some degree or another, are just how life is. And I definitely got into that mindset. To be honest, it wasn't even a case of accepting it. It just crept up so slowly that before I knew it, I was that fish in the bowl. And the wake-up call for me came in two forms. The first was that slap in the face that we all need from time to time. There was an email doing the rounds with one of those life calendars. You stick in your date of birth and it shows you how many days you have left in life based on average life expectancy. And there it was in black and white, or red and green in this case. Nearly half my time was done. And was this it? I'd already peaked with my time in the military, and now it's just a decline of energy, with each day being a fight. It's a terrifying thought when you sit down and really appreciate just how short the time is we have left. But it was sitting in that office and suddenly realizing that I was not me anymore that was the final straw. That night, I really stepped back and took stock of the situation. Not 6 months before, I'd been working on my own in Kabul running an Afghan arrest force in what on paper should have been a far more stressful job, and yet I was suffering more getting the tube into work each day. And admittedly, a lot had changed, but regardless of the circumstances, there was no reason to feel like this. I'd felt as if I needed to reclaim who I really was and what made me happy. And that's when I started making some changes, because I wasn't prepared to let this current reality define the rest of my life. And here's the thing, we can take certain simple actions that make a big difference to our stress response. When you experience a stressful event, your brain communicates with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system. And this has two components, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system functions like a gas pedal in the car. It triggers the fight or flight response, providing the body with a burst of hormones which trigger energy release so that it can respond to perceived dangers. The parasympathetic nervous system acts like a brake. It promotes the rest and digest response that calms the body down after the danger has passed. But if your brain continues to perceive something as dangerous, the adrenal glands will release cortisol to keep the body revved up via the HPA axis. Chronic low-level stress, traffic jams, work pressure, family difficulties, all of this keeps your body in a state of stress that is incredibly damaging. But what I learned is that there are certain activities that anyone can do which will counteract this. And traditionally, the first ones that come up are diet and exercise, which absolutely do play a big role in how we feel. But as I found, when you're living under that unrelenting grip of stress, your body might be functioning so badly that it can be a huge battle to do the things we know will help us in the long run. For me, through research and trial and error, I discovered that it was a combination of smaller, easier, simpler actions that I found and still find make a big difference. The first action I took was to implement a very simple practice I'd learned a couple of years previously from our American counterparts, the Navy SEALs. They used a deep breathing technique to remain calm and focus clearly to avoid reactionary thinking or worse, panic. Now, breathing is something we all do automatically, but the way in which we breathe has a massive impact on our mind and body, and I cannot overstate that. Breathing is regulated by the autonomic nervous system and is the easiest and most instrumental part of it to control and navigate. The way you breathe strongly affects the chemical and physiological activities in your body. In short, it's incredibly powerful. Yet, many of us never harness the power of proper breathing to alleviate stress and maintain good health. A relaxed breath originates in the belly, and the optimal rate is 6 to 10 breaths per minute. However, most people breathe from their chest 16 to 20 times per minute, and it's this shallow breath that keeps us feeling continuously on edge. Think about the times you felt really stressed, when the body involuntarily becomes tense, your chest tightens, and your breathing becomes very rapid and shallow. Well, the chances are that your daily breathing is not far off this, not so shallow that you consciously notice, but enough to be significantly affecting your stress response. The slower and deeper you breathe, the better you will feel. And this is because deep diaphragmatic breathing strikes the ideal balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood, triggering various internal mechanisms that promote relaxation. And when I added in a really simple breathing practice, it made a huge difference. And it didn't take long before my unconscious breathing throughout the day was also deeper and slower. The next change I made may seem a bit crazy at first glance, and I completely get that, but bear with me here. I remembered seeing an article about Wim Hof and the impact cold has on our stress response. So I searched out any material I could find and discovered the world of cold water immersion. Now, I suspect everyone here has felt the shock of cold water before. The freezing temperature causes a stress reaction in the body, causing the fight or flight mechanism to kick in. So if you want to reduce stress, you might wonder why this is a good thing. Well, if you repeat this process of cold water immersion, it gradually reduces the severity of that initial stress reaction. But the real magic is that this applies in other stressful situations, not just on exposure to cold water. Your reaction to stress in daily life is also reduced. And this isn't just anecdotal. Science is proving the theory that repeated short bouts of cold exposure significantly reduces the adrenaline-driven sympathetic response to a different stressor and increases the parasympathetic activity that calms the body down. In other words, our natural adaptations to cope with the stress of cold water lead to less reaction in other unrelated stresses, as well as an ability to calm down faster too. And this cross-adaptation effect lasts for months. Cold water immersion itself has been around for a couple of millennia in various cultures, and thanks to a series of groundbreaking studies, the science community are getting really excited about it. And then there is the resilience building side of things. Our modern worlds are geared to make us physically comfortable. We are rarely out of our comfort zones unless we choose to be. Overcoming and managing the shock of cold water immersion reconnects us with feelings of self-control and the trust that we can cope. Now, when it comes to mindset, I wanted to break down the concept of resilience because we all need a certain baseline resilience to deal with the setback and losses that are an inevitable part of ordinary life. Resilience is the ability to manage uncertainty, resist and overcome fear, while transcending obstacles that may appear to be preventing you from succeeding. Studies on resilience began at the University of Chicago in the late 1970s with Suzanne Cabassa's foundational paper entitled Stressful Life Events. And Cabassa's work is perhaps the most helpful as a framework because it highlights 3 key areas that you must work on to build resilience. The first up is that you have to accept challenges. In this context, Cabassa found that resilient people view a difficulty as a challenge, not as a paralyzing event. They look at their failures and mistakes as lessons to be learned from and as opportunities for growth. They do not view them as a negative reflection on their abilities or their self-worth. And at the root of this idea is fixed and growth mindsets. In a fixed mindset, you believe that your qualities are carved in stone, which challenging events present a problem because rather than seeing them as an opportunity for development, a fixed mindset person will see it as a pass or fail test, something they can either do or not do. Whereas in a growth mindset, you believe that your basic qualities can be cultivated through effort. Next up, we have locate control. And here Cabassa advises, spend your time and energy focusing on situations and events that you have control over. Putting your efforts where they can have the most impact will increase feelings of empowerment and confidence. Spending time worrying about uncontrollable events leads to a feeling of feeling lost and powerless to take action. And a good mental model for this is CIA: control, influence, accept. Imagine, if you will, that you have 3 levels when it comes to how you assign your efforts. The sphere within your control, the sphere outside your immediate control but which you can influence, and everything else which is outside your influence and must be accepted. So when you size up a situation, ask yourself, what can you control, what can you influence, and what must you accept? And what in actual fact is within your control? Broadly speaking, it is your attitude, your emotions, your perspective, your decisions, and your determination. And finally, you have to be committed. For true resilience, you must be committed to your life and your goals and have a compelling reason to get out of bed in the morning. Commitment isn't just restricted to your work. Commit to your relationships, friendships, and the causes you care about. Your level of resilience will at some point come down to how much something means to you. When you are committed to something, it makes bearing any hardships that you encounter so much easier to deal with. Okay, to finish up, I'll just give you the reason why what I did is effective. And that is because it works on both a physiological and a psychological level. If, for example, you only look to improve the physical element, then yes, you will offset the stress you are feeling. But unless you work on your mindset and become less susceptible to stress in the first place, you'll always be stuck at the stalemate. Ultimately, chronic stress is almost entirely down to our reaction to events, and that is completely within our control to change. On the other hand, if you try and tackle your mindset without taking action to calm your autonomic nervous system, to take your foot off the gas and let your body rebalance, then you'll find it so much harder because you'll be in that state of low energy and brain fog. So it's essential that it is a dual approach. And the end result of implementing these changes was that even though my situation was the same, I was back to my old self, the person that I wanted to be. And I absolutely credit stress management as a critical part of this process. In fact, there are no 2 ways about it. It was the key to it all. But I wouldn't change what happened to me because without that experience, I wouldn't have learned the tools that are now an integral part of my business, The Natural Edge, where we are helping thousands of people escape that burden of stress and optimize their long-term health. And if I can jump out of this and get my camera on. Done. Back in the room. Just over 20 minutes. I know Tina's strict on time, so I was looking at my watch. I hadn't actually timed it. I knew it was roughly there, but got through
Great.
it.
Thank you, Simon, so much for an interesting story and such a frank way of telling about your own experiences, and really good to hear that. And I only hope that those who are listening to these webinars don't think that I have some kind of a criteria that my guest speakers have to be willing to dip themselves in cold, icy water, because those who were present in the last webinar that we did, I was showing a picture of myself dipping in a hole in the ice here in Finland. That's something what we do. It's not a known strategy from decades or centuries ago, but that's something that we Finns really enjoy doing, and it is really good for our resilience. And it was interesting that you also had that cold strategy as one of the things that you do. But yeah, I just maybe one comment from you, and then I'll share a little bit of data from our Firstbeat data that ties in so closely together what you were talking about. But thinking back to your military experience, you mentioned a few things, but there clearly are some really interesting differences and similarities. I thought the bubble description really makes perfect sense, that you've got the situation where you have to perform and then you've got all the downtime. But if you compare that life to the real life, what would you consider that something that's very similar what you have brought from there and you are utilizing in your real life experience today?
I think the biggest thing that military environment showed me, or looking back on it when I compare the two, and it sort of comes into Susan Cabassa's model, is that when I was in the military, I was completely committed. That was exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that was sort of, it's very, what's the right word? The core of my identity. It was a job that I loved. I loved that environment. And then I had this period in between where I sort of didn't really know what I wanted to do and went to the city. And as part of that process, as well as the things that I talked about in the webinar to reduce stress, I really started searching for that new meaning of where I wanted my life to go. And that's when I sort of discovered business. And again, it's taken sort of 5 years to get to the point now where I am here. And in that process, if I look at it overall, I went from special forces, so kind of an elite world, to a well-paid management consultancy. And in the process of setting up T&E, I ended up moving back home to my parents. My business partner also moved in. We paid ourselves less than 400 quid a month, and we shared a car. So, if you look at it on paper, that could look unsuccessful or to be in a bad place. But because we were really doing what we loved and we knew we were on the right path, everything else is so much easier. I think the biggest thing I've learned is that more you can understand who you are and what drives you and really take time to dig into that, actually, quiet time to sit down and work that out, and then align your life and actions. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you don't have to quit your job or make big changes, but even small things. There's a good example, a lady in our group, one of our coaching groups, through some stuff that we did, she got the confidence to start playing hockey again, which she hadn't played for years. And she did a post after her first night, and the difference, she was just so happy after taking back up this sport. And she said her husband noticed a difference in her, and it sort of had a knock-on effect. So even small changes like that, if you can start aligning, understanding who you are and really trying to live in line with your values and your beliefs and your ethos, it cuts out so much stress.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me share my slide again for a few minutes here, and we can kind of tie that theory that Simon was talking about to some of the data where we look at it from a slightly different angle, but the parallels are really striking. So those of you who are new to Firstbeat measurements, what it is, it's a heart rate variability based measurement done in real life. You wear a device and it measures your heartbeat all day, all night, during sleep, at work, during leisure time, with the idea of visualizing stress and recovery. And then you get this is from a Firstbeat Live result for somebody. The red color that you can see here, that's the gas or the sympathetic fight or flight mode that Simon was talking about. But in this context, it means anything that causes some kind of activation level in our body. So it's positive and negative things, but it clearly means that there is that cortisol response and we are very active and engaged. And then to contrast that, we have the green color that you can see here. That's recovery. That's the parasympathetic part of the nervous system kicking in, heart rate slowing down. And the key between these two is really to find the balance between the two. We are not going to get rid of the red color because it's part of life. It's normal activation. It's what gets the job done, whether you are in elite forces or a top athlete or just a regular person trying to survive the battles of life. But if that gets stuck so that we are constantly on that red color, on that stress mode, the fight or flight mode is on, it's extremely wearing. And the top graph here is an example of a situation like that, where you can kind of see the sympathetic response going on all day, all evening, and a big part of the nighttime as well. And this is not a sustainable situation if it goes on day after day and week after week, even if most of us will sometimes have days like that. In a more balanced situation, like the example here in the bottom will show, there is still a lot of red color, activation, engagement, getting things done. But in addition to that, you start seeing some blue color, which in this context means exercise. That's one of the really good, effective ways to balance off the stress, like Simon mentioned, making sure that we are physically fit and taking care of our activity levels. But then you can see the green color happening here in the evening before the person goes to sleep, and then mostly during the night time. So the balance between the two sides is good, and it seems that the person is able to manage whatever the inevitable stress in their life is. And I think the concept load of life that I mentioned here, and on the next slide, I'll broaden on that a little bit. When Simon highlighted that in the military, he just had very specific key things to worry about to get the job done. So he didn't have to worry about bills or cleaning or family. He just had to worry about his main task. And that's what made it in a way easier. But the real life is not hardly ever like that. We have all these different things that constitute what I call the overall load of life. The commute, the traffic, health situation, family, job, hobbies, all of that constitutes our load of life. And that needs to be in proportion with our own resources, with our ability to recover. And that's what this graph here, so-called body resources, it's like the battery of our body. We need to have it balanced in such a way that the harder the load in our life is and the more stress that we have, the bigger the demands for recovery are as well. And we call this supercompensation of life, that in order for this equation to work and be kind of sustainable, we have to have enough sleep, enough recovery, enough of those balancing moments that help us bring down the stress levels, whether it's with deep breathing, which is a great exercise, a nap, some kind of a meditation practice, or even that cold water exposure, but something that helps us or moderate that stress response that we all have. And that will allow us to be that best version of ourselves and perform to the optimal potential that we each have. And I don't know if Simon, you might not even have seen these graphs before, but maybe you can just comment, does that make sense to you, or do you have something to add to that how does this idea of physiological data kind of supporting what you were talking about, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I think it's completely, I can relate to it both military and life now. You know, the military, especially in that world of special forces, there are periods where it's unavoidable that you go through periods of less sleep and physically pushing yourself hard. But you can only do that for a certain amount of time, and then you need that rest and recovery. And it's no different in normal life. I think I did a post about it the other day. Social media is really good for this message of always pushing hard. You've always got to get up early, and it's always the go, go, go message.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't balance that out with energy in, it's not sustainable. And I think the other point to make is sometimes people don't understand truly what going max out is. We see it a lot when we get people in to do our coaching. They think that they have to do high intensity workouts all of the time. When in fact, you won't find any elite athlete that trains like that. You know, they'll have intense training maybe once a week for a very short amount of time. You know, take for a sprinter, for example, they'll sprint hard out maybe once, twice a week max, and the rest is lower intensity. And what happens, I think, in both, say, sport and life, is people fall into this middle ground where they don't go easy enough on downtime, and then they don't go hard enough on hard time. They sit in this middle ground. So if someone thinks they're doing a hard workout, for example, every day, well, you're not. In actual fact, if you truly go hard out, you should not be able to recreate that intensity the next day or for a couple of days afterwards. So people aren't truly going to their full potential. They're just sitting in this middle ground. And it's the same with work. You know, if you're pushing it hard every day, you're going to be less productive the next day. You can't avoid that. Most people would be far better doing 3 or 4 hours of like deep flow concentrated work and then some energy in stuff, as opposed to 9-10 hours where it's more procrastination. You're not fully focused. So you sort of apply it across life.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we can accept that there's going to be days and there's going to be times when that load, that effort is going to be maybe a little bit harder than it should be. But then if we start to learn to recognize that feeling that now I'm going over the line and I'm not super compensating, I'm not able to charge my body's battery. So that's when it's time to start then making that balance better and paying more attention to those things that help us to also come down from that. And hard training is a good example. Hard exercise training is a good example, because even if we might really enjoy that and we feel great when we do a hard workout, but that also ups our demands for recovery as well. Okay, I think we have some time for questions now. If you have some questions, you can write them in the chat, but I had a few questions here already ahead of time, so I'm going to start with that. There was one question for Simon that someone had sent ahead of time, that when and why did you become aware that you need to prepare your resilience to compensate for the stress peaks in the military? And also that how important do you find self-efficacy, meaning believing in your own ability to get the job done? How important is that for managing those demands?
I mean, I think in terms of understanding the resilience or when you need that for the military, it's a natural part of the training anyway. It's not as if there's one moment where you suddenly realize that. The entire of basic training is designed to take someone from off the street to the point where they can function in stressful situations. And the only way that works is by gradual, I guess, inoculation or stepping outside of your comfort zone, which is another probably good lesson for general life. You know, for us wanting to improve ourselves, we do need, like you said, those periods of stress to improve, but you need to do it in a controlled way so you're not pushing yourself so far out. In terms of the self-efficacy, I think that plays a major part in life in general, and it sort of comes, that to me ties into the growth and fixed mindset. If you see challenges or obstacles as challenges, as opposed to pass failed test or debilitating problems, you're going to approach them in a much more confident way, because you understand that it doesn't matter if it goes wrong or if it fails, you can just go at it again. As opposed to seeing it as a direct reflection on your self-worth. So if you don't do as well as you wanted to, then, you know, people give up and they never get to that point of improving. So I think it's a good, taking that attitude is a good confidence builder. And having that self-confidence is a part of resilient, when you do have that belief that you can cope with things. And that's where you know, cold water immersion, stepping outside our comfort zone, the mindset work, all of these things, they all tie in together and create that feedback loop to help create that resilience. And I think probably a key point to say with all of this is that you don't get to a point where you're suddenly resilient, or, you know, you don't win at health. These are things, say the mindset work and stuff like that, it's ongoing. You know, I do the breath work or whatever it is each day. I'm continually revisiting stuff in my mindset and working on it. You don't get to a point where, okay, that's good, I don't need to do this anymore. And so the only way you do that is by finding a way to work these habits into your life. When we teach this in our programs, we give a framework. So we talk about cold water immersion or breathing or whatever, but we're really big on, we talk about a moving average. So to get people out of that perfection mindset where they think they have to do a rigid program for 8 weeks or whatever it is, as opposed to take the framework, take these tools, and then work out how you can build them in, and just concentrate on having an overall positive moving average. Maybe you're busy, maybe you can do 2 minutes of breathing, maybe you're stood in a line for a supermarket and you just do a couple of minutes breathing there, or whatever it is. The more you can get in line with that and understand it's for life, the quicker you'll actually get to the point you need to be, instead of trying to be rigid with everything.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's interestingly when I showed those red and green graphs before, deep breathing is one of the fastest ways that we've noticed that a person can move from that red sympathetically dominant state to a green state. Even just a 5-minute session can really dramatically bring your stress levels down and have what we call those green moments that can then help quite a bit. There's another question that came from a coach, I think of somebody who is coaching different kind of individuals, that do you find that resilience exercises are more effective in a group setting or as one-on-one sessions? What's your take on that?
I think for me, there's definitely a benefit in team activities which you can do together to bond the team, etc. If I think back to military time, training, whatever it is, it's always the times of hardship that bonds a team better together than any of the easy stuff. But resilience itself, I think it starts at the individual level. It has to start there with the individual, because it only sort of takes one person in the team to then have a negative and knock-on effects for everyone around, whether that's mindset or whatever it is. So I think resilience itself, it's like health, it's our own personal responsibility. And yes, we need help with that and support, but it is up to us to take management of it. So yeah, it starts with that, but there's definitely benefit in a team.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, there is definitely time and place for different kind of group exercises. But one of the things that this kind of physiological data really highlights is that the individuals, we are so different as individuals that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the next one. And we can't just say that these are the 3 top best ways to improve your resilience, because for one person it can be cold water immersion or deep breathing. Somebody else, it might be something completely different that helps them switch off. So that's where the individual aspect, I think, really is the key starting point, obviously. But then, of course, we can then go from that and utilize that individual resilience in a team setting as well. Let me see do you see any questions on the chat there? I had one more question here, a couple of minutes left. I have a question here that came ahead of time also about some red flags. What are commonly agreed red flags for management or HR or a person in charge of some employees to spot when someone in their team needs an intervention or is struggling too much? So what would you highlight as some of the red flags that are really important to pay attention to?
I think for me, because this almost ties back into what you just said there about everyone being an individual, that's where it comes down to whoever the manager is, team leader is understanding the baseline of each of the individuals they have in their team, because everyone reacts to stress differently. It's funny, you see it in the military, if you're going through, especially on selection processes or something like that, when people are under stress, some people may be quicker to lose their temper, get angry, snap about things, where other people will just withdraw into themselves and don't engage as much. So it can be very different reactions depending on the individual. So I think that's where a good manager should understand how that person usually reacts, how they generally are, and if they start seeing deviations or variations in their behavior and changes, that's where the red flags should start to show, and you can ask those questions and try and make that intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same applies for the regular working life as well, that if somebody starts to behave differently from what is usual. But I do think one of the problems is that as people, so many of us have the tendency to just sort of tough it out and keep going and pretend like everything is normal until maybe such a time where you just no longer can sustain that. So it does take a very sensitive and sort of intuitive and and close look at your team to start spotting that person really something is not quite right, because we do have that maybe built-in attitude of trying to come on, you can do it, keep going, and not admitting that maybe some kind of a change is really needed. Simon, you were asked here by somebody that how often do you measure your heart rate variability, or do you?
So yeah, I do. I go through periods where I will measure it, and I think HRV. So I think it's a useful tool in the same way. Sort of tracking your diet can be a useful tool, and again, I think it's one of those things where it comes down to the individual of how often you do it, and making sure that you do use it as a tool and not getting sucked into being obsessed with the data. I'm quite good because I have been, exercising, all the rest of it, going through the military for the last 20 odd years. I'm pretty good now at getting to the point where I understand my body and know the signs of when I need to ease off and when I can and step it up. And that's really the point where you want to get to, is understanding your own body, what stresses you out, what your stresses are, and the signs to look out for of when you know you need that downtime. So I think it's useful to have that data because you can link the two. You can be measuring your HRV and then link that when it is those periods where it's showing more red, to what's been going on that day or that week, and you can sort of make those connections. And then the more that you do that, the better your own understanding will be for naturally managing your stress response.
Yeah, I'm very much on the same page on that as much as I love the graphics that we have from Firstbeat, and I think Firstbeat data provides some really, really interesting insights, as do many other kinds of measurements. We have to be careful on not starting to rely on that too much, that it can provide some really helpful checkpoints and guidelines, but then learning to really find those methods that work is still the very bottom line, the most important thing. Okay, great. I don't see any more questions in the chat, and we are a couple of minutes past our time, so I think it's time to say thank you for everyone. You can see the contact information here, so that if you want to contact Simon for information about the offering that he has, or if you're interested to learn more about our Firstbeat methods, you can contact us here at info@firstbeat.com, or you can start following us on social media and hear what else we have to say. But yeah, thank you, Simon, so much for joining us for the webinar, and thanks everyone for joining the session. And the recording will be available to you in a couple of days, so that you can go back if you missed some part of that. But great to have so many people online, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Tina.
Bye-bye.